All right, welcome everybody. We're going to jump right into this with Guy, and we're going to ask, what is the difference between pseudonymous and anonymous? How is that relevant in crypto?
Oh, pseudonymous is like, I guess, being half pregnant or something. So pseudonymous means that there's some ID, like a hash or like your public address, but there's still linkability, right? So like if you have a crypto wallet and you're sending a bunch of transactions, then everyone can see the trace, right? That's like how Bitcoin, Ethereum, most wallets operate, and it's fairly well understood at this point that pseudonymity does not really give you like proper privacy.
Gotcha. And following that, Howard, is opt-in privacy enough, or do we need privacy by default since everything is not, built in, it's not anonymous off the bat?
I think there needs to be universes where both exist, but I think what's missing in the ecosystem today is this private by default concept. When you look at how technologies tend to evolve, they tend to start with public by default because it's the easier solution, but people quickly come to realize the shortcomings of that. And I think that in crypto especially, where financial transactions can easily be kind of tracked in ways that may be nefarious or in ways that you may not want to, in order to protect your privacy, I think having the option of private by default it's paramount, or it's critical. I'll also say it's much easier to go from private to public than from public to private. You can't really take back what you say once you've put it out there. And so I do think there's a universe for this. I think that they're very complementary in the space especially.
Yeah, I hear you. And considering we have public transactions, private transactions, and all of these aspects interacting with each other in the same environment, what does that look like when they mesh? Zooko?
That's a good question. So privacy and transparency are both necessary features for different use cases, right? Like, so I've been working in privacy all along with Zcash and also before that. So I think about privacy all the time. But transparency is really, really useful for a lot of things. For example, if some organization or application is custodying other people's funds, it would be ideal if they had to give real-time, fine-grained visibility into exactly what they're doing with it to the public at all times. And fortunately enough, that's what transparent blockchains are great at, right? So the same person for two different use cases is going to want privacy for some of it and transparency for some of it. And you ask something like, how do they interact? There's a there's a widespread simplified notion, like if you take a private thing and you use it along with something that's disclosing your information, then what do you get? And the natural assumption is you get a not private thing out of that, right? And that makes sense, but it depends on the specifics. So, so I have a bunch of Zcash on my phone, right? And anybody who comes up to me afterwards, I'll put Zcash on your phone. And it's in the Zcash shielded pool. And if I were to send 10 of these coins like through a bridge to a transparent blockchain, so I get like an ERC20 token that is redeemable for shielded Zcash, then my 10 shielded Zcash have exited the private world and they've entered the transparent world, right? And then if I do something with it on this transparent blockchain, like buy an NFT or whatever people do on Ethereum nowadays, now what information is visible to whom from that? So everyone can tell that 10 Zcash came out of the shielded world and bought an NFT. But there's no information on the blockchain that links that back to my identity, my phone, my other assets, my other transactions, my net worth, or anything else, right? So that's a case where you have a transparent thing and you combine it with a public thing, and you still retain privacy over all that information. Well, what's public is the fact that this NFT sold for exactly 10 ZEC at that moment. So anyway, it's nuanced, and I think as people experiment with it more, and like as services that show you all the public information get more and more commodified and presented to end users, then people will start developing better intuitions about the interplay between privacy and transparency.
Yeah, I think that shows that pseudonymous is enough in some situations.
I don't know if I call it pseudonymous. I don't know. I mean, that was a good answer, but
Yeah, debate over whether the transactions are
well,
linked together, but they're not linked to anyone.
yeah. So in that scenario, I bought this NFT. So now everyone in the world can tell that this NFT got bought for 10 Zcash at that moment, right? But there's zero. The zero and zero knowledge proofs is for how much extra information gets leaked. So there's zero extra information, such as there's no. I'll show you this in person after this if you want. if you look at it on the Block Explorer, there's no address. There's no from address, right?
Yeah.
So it's not like I have a Bitcoin style address that I'm hoping to keep unlinked with other information. There's actually no address there. There's zero information there about the source of the funds. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Okay, I hear that. That does separate the difference a bit. So we do have other ecosystem participants other than people buying NFTs. So Elena, I want to know, what does it look like to you in terms of who is choosing to participate in private ecosystems, whether that be node operators, users of any other type?
Yeah, so our goal at Ironfish was to make it really easy to run a full node. We kind of take the stance that privacy really matters, and people should be able to run full nodes very easily. So for Ironfish, you can run a full node right now with npm install -a Ironfish. So we made it really easy. And we're just ended our testnet 3, and we had 60,000 nodes online, which was pretty awesome. And again, like the reason why we had that amount is because we made it really easy for people to actually download and run the node. And what we've seen is, if you make it so accessible, then anyone can be a node operator. And we've seen people literally around the world, mostly non-US, actually run a node in mine. But going back to Zooko's point, because I think it's really interesting, because we've been thinking about this a lot at Ironfish, like where privacy matters, and how do we make something that's both practical and pragmatic and useful, but still like private. And so the way we thought about it, which I don't know, is kind of parallel to what you said, is the base layer is private always, not even by default. There's no optionality. And if we do computation in the future, the computation will be public. So again, for things like buying an NFT, it's actually useful to know that information. In fact, people want to know, NFT price discovery or who owns what or what the actual history was. But people obviously don't want that to be linked to their identity. And when we talked to other people in the ecosystem, they kind of had the same answer of, I want to buy an NFT, but I don't want to go to a conference and everyone know that I have like millions and millions of dollars worth of NFTs in my publicly accessible wallet that's potentially linked to my Twitter account, So there's kind of a difference between like what should be private and what should be public. And our stance is that the base layer should always be private, computation layer not necessarily so.
Awesome, I hear that. With the ecosystem growing in those directions, Howard, where do you think it's going to go next as we make privacy a little bit more available for some other things? And that could be healthcare or other industries that aren't yet in crypto, or that could be extending what we already have.
I think specialization is definitely one of the key next steps, but I think in order to even get to specialization, like one area that we're really missing on is the accessibility of the technology, and that's both in software and in hardware. I think that right now we're kind of just at this cusp where a lot of new elliptic curves are being standardized or being used. Certainly a lot of new proof systems, a lot of new cryptographic techniques, a lot of new hardware approaches are also being taken, and these things have yet to kind of really transcend. But I think that as they do transcend, people are going to specialize that type of software or hardware into specific areas. I think in terms of DeFi, that's an area that's already slowly starting to manifest. I think certainly within the gaming space, people are starting to see the value. With rollups now, people are also taking this and using it in general purpose manners as well, and you're seeing the rise of kind of the ZK EVM approaches that are taken. I think that these end up creating different categories for, existing applications on the web as well as new ones. And to give you kind of more concretely, like today, for example, I think one of the big elephants in the room is that very few people use crypto on a day-to-day basis to spend. And the challenge with that is that they fail to see the privacy implications of cryptocurrencies because of that. If say Venmo had the option to be completely open in the sense that once I've sent money to you once, that I can just see your account for the rest of the time, the same way that say your Ethereum wallet would work, I think people would be less or would be more hesitant to use that because they would say, oh, I sent you money once. Now I see when you go to the grocery store and buy stuff. Now I see how much money you make. Now I see how much balance you have. And I think that these privacy technologies need to kind of take a step further in terms of just actually getting their way into day-to-day use, because the minute you do that, I think it's the minute that the consumer starts to appreciate it. And I just don't think we're there yet. And a huge part of that is that the software and hardware hasn't kind of manifested into the hands of the average Joe yet. We're getting there, but I think it takes time.
Yeah, Zooko, do you think the average user knows the degree that their information is public, and do you think they're educated about kind of the pitfalls of everything being out there? And if not, what could we do to, push it towards that?
People definitely don't understand the nuances. Like, what people don't understand is how computers can put 2 and 2 together, and they like have radar vision, and they can see you in fine detail just by picking up a whole bunch of different data sets, which to a human would look just like baffling, but to a computer that's like X-ray vision into your whole life. So people don't understand yet how computers have that superpower from different sources of information, but they do already very much, I think, have a concern about being exploited or what's the word, like monitored, which I think is accurate for them to have that concern. A few years ago, there's this widespread meme that people don't care about privacy. And I believed it at the time. There were all these newspaper articles and these reputable newspapers and whatever, and scientific studies that were funded by Google and Facebook that proved that people didn't care about privacy. And I believed it. I was like, damn, this sucks. People don't care about privacy. And then later I realized, no, wait a minute. They just pulled one over on me. Real people actually do care about that.
Yeah, so we know it's not really a niche interest. Elena, how do you think we drive the adoption then? If it's not a niche interest, if people want it, what are the first ways we're going to give it to them?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a pretty good segue to everything else that people have said. If we are going to say, okay, crypto is going to be the next payment layer, having it be so transparent is just like a non-starter. Like, how do you get financial institutions to actually adopt crypto when their entire budget sheet and order books are private? Again, you are at high risk of being phished or scammed or just targeted if all of your information is public. But it's kind of a dystopian world if everything's public and, kind of like what Howard was saying, an attacker potentially know exactly which coffee shop you're going to, exactly when you're out of town, and so on. So I think privacy is actually the end result of crypto. We're not going to see crypto actually get to mainstream adoption without privacy, just because of very, very pragmatic reasons. And what Zooko was saying as well, people do care about privacy. Maybe they say they don't, and then you kind of pry a little bit further, and it's well, do you want your ex to see all the things you're doing? Okay, I don't want that. And then you kind of pry a little bit further, and you're okay, actually, everyone cares about privacy. It's just, I think privacy kind of has this connotation that people take now that's kind of incorrect. But all these arguments that I kind of mentioned are also one of the arguments that we're using with regulators as well, right? Consumer protection goes hand in hand with privacy. And right now, crypto is inherently unsafe for people to use without privacy-preserving technologies.
Yeah, Howard, do you want to jump in on that?
Yeah, if I could just add one thing. I think everyone in this room actually intrinsically understands privacy, but I think the problem when we're thinking about it from digital privacy is that we're thinking about it from the wrong frame of context. We're thinking about it like defense as opposed to offense. It's more about protection than it is about a feature. And to give you an example, it's like when you walk into a restaurant, the restaurant doesn't sell you on the fact that they have booths and that when you go into the bathroom, there's toilet stalls. It's almost assumed you're going to have some space next to the guy sitting next to you or next to the person on the next stall, right? It's assumed that those things are there because you wouldn't go to that restaurant if they weren't there. And the problem is that when you're on the web, you take for granted today, especially in Web 2, that the server is doing that job of protecting you. But the problem is in Web 3, you don't have this server protecting you anymore. You're just left with like just openness now, and like everyone can see everything. And I think that for some applications you do need that. Like sometimes it's important to be out in the open about some things, but as every one of us knows, I feel like we also recognize that some things need some level of granularity and privacy, and some things need to be fully private. And to kind of take the word privacy out of the picture altogether, like when you think about playing a game of like Battleship online with someone else, it's like it's assumed you're not going to see their board, and that like privacy is not like it's Battleship isn't selling themselves. Oh, we have privacy. Like here's you can't see your opponent's ship. It's like it's an intrinsic part of the game, and I think one of the problems is that we think about privacy as this defensive thing that's like data protection, ownership, which is important. Don't get me wrong, but I think that what we aren't thinking about is what can I do with it, because of the fact that you can create these new experiences where you can actually give people a really tailored shopping experience just for you, because only you have that information, that model that represents you, and you can deliver a taste to them that's for you, and no one else sees it. But like these types of conversations, I feel like just we haven't reached a level where everyone can kind of take for granted that this is a thing, and we've gotten really used to the Web 2 paradigm where that server that learns everything about you actually kind of protects you by creating this illusion of a wall for you. I think in Web 3 we're getting there now.
Yeah, we are absolutely taking a lot for granted there. Guy, I was going to ask, we know ZKPs are one of our solutions for this. What else do we have in the space that can help us get there? But if you had anything to add on to Howard's there, jump in there first.
Yeah, so actually I want to add on his last point. That's exactly it. Look, we all agree here that privacy is a basic human right. It's important. I could not agree more with Zooko and the privacy is normal narrative. Like we should be on the offensive, not the defensive. But I also agree with Howard's point is that privacy, to me, privacy equals functionality. There's literally so many applications that you just cannot do, especially in Web3 today, because you don't have privacy. Battleship is an example. Poker is another example. If I see your hand, your cards, there is no game. Pretty much any game where there is some kind of like hidden state falls into that. We launched a movie fully on chain with Kevin Smith, for example, as an NFT, and each NFT had this like personalized content and the actual movie, or at least the key to the movie, which was like in IPFS. Right? The only way this worked, the only way this gave you kind of like the experience of this like a decentralized Netflix or a mini version of it, if you will, that is completely decentralized, was because no one could see that content unless they actually minted the NFT, got the key to unlock it. So it's really more of a functionality thing. Another thing that we're seeing is around security, right? Imagine that you have a smart contract that can keep a private state. I mean, that's literally what Secret does. Like, it gives you smart contracts, and you can hide like private data in it. So imagine you can hide like a private key in it, right? So suddenly you can start thinking about things like almost like non-custodian solutions where you authenticate to the smart contract, and then that smart contract is signing on your behalf. Or maybe that contract has like half of the key, and you have like your own hardware wallet, and that smart contract has like a policy saying, you cannot spend more than like 1 ETH a day, because if you do, then likely, someone hacked like your wallet or something like that. So it's an even added security layer. And I think that the whole discussion about how privacy is important, but people need to realize that there is so much more to privacy than just like protecting our data in the most simple sense.
Yeah, I hear that. So we know where we need to get. I do want to ask a question if anything is going to stop us in getting there. So Zooko, Alex Pertsev is still in jail after his work on Tornado Cash. Are regulations something that is on the top of the mind when building privacy protocols?
I don't think we yet know why Alex Pertsev is in jail. They've not yet revealed any charges. And apparently the Dutch legal system is terrible that you can keep someone in jail for, 110 days or something at this point without charging them. So far, my lesson is don't live in the Netherlands. The other Tornado Cash developers, one of whom was in the United States, aren't in jail. I mean, I don't have an opinion on it until, aside from that it's a terrible legal, that you should have a right to a speedy trial. Aside from that, I don't know yet what, if anything, he's charged with. I don't
Okay.
know if that's the answer you were looking
Yeah,
for,
no,
but that's
well-
all I know.
Moving past Tornado Cash and looking at regulation in general, is that something that is heavily on the mind with, we're seeing exchanges and other entities we think we can trust going down, and that might bring more regulation on the space in general, everywhere across the board.
For sure,
privacy
yeah.
is somewhere to be
Stablecoins and
cautious.
centralized exchanges, I guess, are the biggest focuses of regulators for good reason currently.
And staking, apparently. For some reason, staking is bad.
All right, so I'm going to bring it back to you, Guy, and back to the question we had before about, we know what we're trying to solve in privacy right now. We know we're taking things for granted, and we need to actually realize these things that people are expecting. How do we get there? What technologies can we use other than zero-knowledge proofs? What do we have at our disposal?
So yeah, zero-knowledge proofs are amazing, just to be clear. I use them a lot, and I love them. But just like in blockchains, right, with digital signatures, hash functions, proof of work, then proof of stake, consensus algorithms, with privacy too, you have a stack, you have a tool chain. And I feel that right now the discussion is somewhere like around blockchain 2015, where blockchain can do everything. It can make me coffee in the morning, it can do my laundry, it's all that. And if you want to get past to a more productive space of a discussion, then we need to realize that privacy technologies are a range. And there's obviously zero-knowledge proofs, which are great definitely for scalability, definitely for a lot of things that you can kind of, let's say if you have your own data, and you want to prove something on it, and you can run the computation yourself, zero-knowledge proofs are probably amazing. But I think the problem usually gets more complicated when you have multiple users, which is in many cases the case with blockchains, and you have multiple sources of data that you need to bring together and do something with them. That's usually called the secure computation or MPC problem, if people are aware. But the gist of it is that you gotta now combine data from different people. So you can't just have each person prove a statement on their data separately. You gotta do it together. A great example is a sealed bid auction. If you wanna have a sealed bid auction contract where the bids stay private even after the execution ended and you only reveal the top bid, then you need some other tool. And those tools, there's really only 3 tools. There's trusted execution environment, which is most of what Secret uses today. This is basically assisted hardware, where it's basically, let's say, it's very similar to your ledger device or your Trezor, like a hardware wallet. So it's more expensive, it's more general than that. On every processor, you have this region in the processor, in memory, where even if you own the machine, even if you have root access, you can't really probe into what's going on there. And you can kind of simulate and running computations over encrypted data, and then you can have users from different sources kind of bring the data to that place and run the computation. It has its fair of challenges, side channel attacks and all that. Then there's multi-party computation, which is a form of cryptography. And then there's FHE, which is actually what I'm mostly excited about today. That's, for those who don't know, that's fully homomorphic encryption. And that's really kind of the holy grail. It's this idea where you can just encrypt the data, and you can send it to some server, and then that server can just obliviously run all computations over that encrypted data without ever seeing anything. It's like magic.
Yeah,
yeah.
Guy, if we're using some of these strategies that you just mentioned here, Elena, I want to ask, what are the difficulties in implementing some of those? I mean, what are the struggles with ZKPs and other privacy strategies in processing these transactions?
Yeah, so I want to kind of bring it back to the space as a whole of why I got here. Firstly, crypto is probably one of the most welcoming spaces in the industry ever, and then privacy within that has been a really great community as well. And I really do truly believe that the fact that we have so many projects working on privacy in different ways is such a good thing. And like obviously we have a great representation in this panel today of different projects attacking in different ways. And it's kind of like Darwinism in a way, but it's also like really great because we have so many like minds attacking the problem, and and we have like allies again to make these arguments of why privacy is good. And so obviously we have Zcash, who has been kind of a leader in new like cryptography tools and ZKPs that everyone in the field has actually benefited greatly from. There's us, we're trying to be more of a privacy layer and like interact with other chains. I think Aleo is great because again, like they're doing private computations for the web, and there's other projects too, like Aztec and Espresso systems and whatnot. And again, every single project actually attacks privacy in such a totally different way. That again, it kind of depends on the use case that a person is looking for. And as we like develop in the industry, I think like people are going to gravitate towards one or the other. But in terms of use, like one example that I use quite a bit is Tornado Cash. Like before it was sanctioned, it was the #1 used privacy protocol like that we have seen, at least for Ethereum. In terms of TVL, in terms of usage, it actually had the metrics, despite the fact that it wasn't perfect, it was flawed, maybe the privacy wasn't quite there. But one thing it has done really well was just ease of use. Like you go on the website, there's like one button to like withdraw, one button to deposit, and that worked really well. And so I think that should be a lesson to all of us that usability trumps almost everything. If you don't build your product accessible, then people don't use it, regardless of like your kind of philosophy about what's the best privacy mechanism or what the future should hold.
Yeah, thank you. Howard, question for you. What does the state of hardware acceleration look like with all these computationally intensive solutions we're trying to implement?
It is mad, to be completely upfront. People are going at ZK hardware like crazily right now. I've heard and seen, and also even on our network, recently it's been at like 100 billion proofs per second on our network, and there's across something like 50,000 provers. And so, and that's just people who are doing proving, like not node operators, not client nodes, not developers. And at least we surveyed some of the top 50 of those provers, and they're all running pretty industrialized operations at this point. Mostly GPUs, FPGAs, starting to contemplate ASICs now. I think that right now there's a mass realization that this technology can achieve a lot if we have the dedicated hardware to speed things up. And so I anticipate at least over the next year or two, there's going to be quite a bit of ramp up on that front. I think this is going to benefit not just a network like Aleo, but frankly every L1 and L2 out there. Everything from the roll-up discussions over to the interop discussions to use it to prove it in ZK. I think also in terms of off-chain scaling, there's also a lot of opportunities, off-chain privacy as well. And so these are things that I kind of see at the forefront. We're right at that tipping point, and it's a very exciting thing to watch.
Yeah, we'll have to see how that hardware evolves. And Zooko, I'd like to ask, do you think there is any chance of this environmental factor coming back into play with hardware? That is this going to be like ETH proof of work mining or something like that when it picks up and when we see this adoption?
What's the question? I don't get it.
With ZK hardware being used more for different networks, do we think this is going to have some detrimental environmental aspect of we're running all this hardware, we're doing all this extensive computation, and it's using a lot of electricity?
I don't know. I hadn't ever thought of that before. I imagine ZK hardware as being like, I buy a new iPhone and it comes with a ZK circuit built into the CPU so that everything works fast. And I guess that would also be efficient. So it would be the opposite of wasting.
Yeah, we'd definitely love to have it at the point of something closer to a light client there. Now, earlier, Elena, you mentioned something of a dystopia. I want to ask if some of these tools aren't built, do you think it's going to be CBDCs for everything, and do you think that is going to hurt the crypto space?
Yeah, I mean, I had a conversation with a friend of mine of like, what is the Dark Mirror episode of like China wins, we have CBDCs, and they surveil everything. Because that's kind of like the world we're heading towards, which is pretty unfortunate. And that's for two reasons. One, there's like a resistance to privacy. And two, the U.S. government is actively pushing companies to go offshore, which is pretty unfortunate in terms of launching, in terms of developing even, and there's like actual stats to back that. So all of that is like the dark future of what happens if we don't fight for privacy, because that's actually the path we're headed on.
Yeah, we want to keep it in-house and keep building. Thank you all for coming and speaking on this panel, and thank you all in the crowd for coming and listening to us. That's all we have for this talk.
Cool.